help with anything, just let me know. My name is Megan, and we're happy to do so. And Dr. Larry, I'm going to let you take the floor.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, and thank you guys for being here. And especially your employers for just kind of opening things up and getting you guys back out into the real world. I mentioned in the last session, and as some of the others, I really come to believe I think these events have become almost more emotional, mentally therapeutic, as well as educational. Just getting our like-minded souls together, rubbing heads with like-minded geeks is just something that's we just kind of needed, I think. And it just helps kind of revalidate us, I think, for the important work that we do. Also getting our emotional teeter-totters, batteries recharged and kind of back in balance. So again, thanks for being here. And also the MD Expo staff for putting on, again, incredibly great, meaningful, very, very value-added programs for us as well. So what I want to share with you is just some really hard-earned and somewhat painful lessons that we've learned over the years from patient injuries and deaths. Any of you that worked in hospitals long enough may have undoubtedly and unfortunately seen patient injuries or patients being accidentally killed. And it's really pretty horrific stuff to see, and especially for the caregivers that may have been involved directly in those injuries or deaths is even more kind of crushing for them. I got into this stuff like many of you did, working in hospitals about 22 years, and just getting sucked into and being asked, well, how did this happen? How did this patient get burned? How did this ventilator patient die? What happened here? And so even after I left healthcare work, and in the academia, I kept doing a fair amount of forensic engineering, expert witness work. So some of the case studies I've got in here, I'm going to be talking about as well. Virtually all of them, virtually, literally all of them, all required me signing non-disclosure agreements. We're not supposed to talk about any of this stuff. And about, I don't know, 10 years ago, I just said, hell with that. We got to talk about these things or we're not going to learn. Virtually all of the results are, often sealed up. They never see the light of day. And as a result, we don't learn as much as we should be learning. And as a result, we'll see we're literally decades behind the industry, especially aviation, in terms of investigating incidents and accidents. Obviously, I don't disclose, identifying information, patient information, hospital information, but the incidents themselves are incredibly rich with insights and knowledge about what happens. And we just owe it to ourselves in the profession, especially the injured or killed patient and their family to learn from these. So fundamentally look at why we investigate these things. And also, depending on our perspectives, whether we're a clinician or an engineering technician, a person, a legal person, we come at these investigations differently. So there's often competing and some complementary perspectives, but it's important to look at those. And then we'll see some case studies also that we'll touch on. But we really have to credit this Institute of Medicine report to Air is Human in 1999 that kind of quite literally gave birth to this entire patient safety movement. In this report, when it came out, it just shook up the whole damn field, kind of scaring the crap out of everybody, because it also claimed and concluded that we were accidentally killing about 99,000 patients a year in our nation's hospitals. The best estimates we have now from about 2015 is that we're at about 400,000 per year accidentally killed in our nation's hospitals. It makes that the third leading cause of death in hospitals. We don't often hear much about it anymore because it's like kind of, well, if you died in the hospital, you must have been sick. The fact that you were accidentally punched out, it's such an obscene, horrible concept that many people just simply can't agree and acknowledge it. But we have this report to credit kind of giving birth to this issue. And one of the key conclusions that they made that is really, really insightful is that the errors that we're seeing are caused by systems, faulty systems and processes that lead or encourage people to make mistakes or to prevent them from backing out of those that they may have made. So that has given us a tremendous amount of insight. And since then, we've got a ton of books. There's been a lot of great work that's been done. Books, we even have journals on patient safety. A tremendous amount of research has been done. So we're really much more aware than we have been. We're doing a lot of good as well, but there's still way ways to go. Virtually everything we have is computerized. That in itself has created a whole host of special issues, and they're not even talking about the networking, interoperability, connectivity issues going on. It's just the software, firmware, code-based related problems. and just the complexity of that type of technology in general adds to the problem. We also have a tremendous amount of really good resources out here. The VA, these are kind of really good cookbook approaches if you're looking about trying to set up or improve your own incident investigation program within your facilities. The VA's got a great book. ECRI probably started this, Mark Bruley back in the ECRI days, ECRI days. They did a tremendous amount of good work, and they still have great services. A lot of good resources out there to grab more of this. So we've learned from these publications and these people that have done a lot of this work. So this is where some of this is all coming from. And one of the consistent themes you see through all of these different materials, reference materials, is that the optimal way of doing these investigations within a facility is through a team approach, where you have critical representatives from obviously our circles, clinical engineering, HCM. You need the clinical input. There may be some special patient safety representatives you have on there. And our facilities people need to be plugged in as well. And often managing that team, again, in general, not every place necessarily is the same, but in general, is your risk management people. They often have the authority within the hospitals. They may have legal people on staff. So they're often in a good strategic position to kind of oversee and manage these teams. And the real benefit from an interdisciplinary team approach, very valuable, is that different disciplines will see things from different perspectives. And you get a tremendous amount of synergy, if you will. 1 and 1 makes 10 kind of thing. With everybody coming at these incidents, depending on the background, they're going to see things differently, just like depending on the angle you look at the pointer. One person's going to see a circle, another person's going to see an oval, a rectangle. And when you bring all these different disciplines together, it really can give you a tremendous edge in finding out what really went wrong. That's the good thing. The reality, however, these different backgrounds can create some serious conflicts and communication issues as well, because invariably each person on the team is kind of protective, understandably. When we're on there, it's our equipment. Nothing wrong with our equipment. It's the user didn't know what they were doing. Well, the nursing clinic people, they're going to say, it's your equipment. Don't attack my nurses, that kind of thing. So the realities are these different perspectives can create conflicts, communication issues. So you need a good leader, good management of that team. But if you can work it out in those places that do this, it works out really well. What they all can basically agree on, and this is no brainer, no rocket science, the fundamental reason why we're doing this is to improve patient safety. Nobody really has an issue with that. We're all trying to improve that, and we improve it by finding out what really happened, the root cause. And then the goal, once you've determined that, is hopefully you can do something, changing policies, practices, equipment if need be, to prevent it from happening again. That's the fundamental goal. Getting there, though, is not the easy thing. But what we can often model that after is exactly and precisely why the NTSB exists, the National Transportation Safety Board. They're an independent agency that has a mandate and the authority to investigate all of these kinds of accidents. That's why you'll see them within hours on the ground after an air crash with a team, interdisciplinary team. You got engine people, you got avionics people. They'll even bring in for forensic psychologists to kind of do autopsies on the psychological autopsies on the pilots and the staff, different perspectives, trying to find out what happened, going through the bodies, looking for injury mechanisms, and they learn from it, and literally tearing things apart. And that's exactly what they do, and that's why they are literally decades ahead of healthcare. They publish these findings, they publicly make them available. Aircraft, the manufacturers take that information. It's precisely why aviation is so incredibly safe as it is, because we've learned from all of those tragedies in the past. I don't know if you ever heard of John Nance. He's the former aviation correspondent for ABC News. He's a pilot and also an attorney. He's written a number of books. He was even at an Amy meeting a number of years ago. And he makes a whole ton of really good parallels between healthcare and aviation, what we can learn and model from that whole area, which is precisely kind of what the VA did right around in 1999. They set up a National Center for Patient Safety, kind of analogous, loosely modeled after the NTSB, where they've got a in the organization. Every VA hospital has representatives to that committee, and and they continually looking at overall safety kinds of things, the same kind of general model that NTSB does. I don't remember what it was now, 10 maybe years or more ago, there was a outbreak in VA hospitals of some cross-contamination of either colonoscopes or endoscopes or something. I think somebody recall that maybe. And they didn't know why. What was that? They were infecting patients with instruments from endoscopes or colonoscopes, and they didn't know why. And so what they did, they just simply grounded all of those surgeries until they could figure out what went wrong. Just like the FAA will do with a plane, they can't figure out these 737 MAXs. We don't know why, but we're not flying them anymore. And they just shut everything down until they figured it out, traced it back to some sterilization issue in one of their facilities, corrected it, and they were back in business again. Trying to do that in a private hospital, where you've got a real heavy GI group saying they're not going to do procedures, very, very much more difficult to do. But it's a great kind of model. I did a little editorial some years ago. I thought, what a cool thing it would be if we had something analogous in healthcare, where we had somebody with the authority vested in them, like the NTSB does, the skill set, of an ECRI, and kind of a mission and a model after the NCSP. It's kind of an ideal pie in the sky kind of thing. How to make it work is a whole other reality, but I thought it would be kind of cool if we had something like that, which we don't. But in those facilities that are trying to do these things, what we see is this is exactly one of the reasons we do it. We increase patient safety, injuries and deaths go down, interruptions in care, use error, anxiety, losses. We don't eliminate them, but they can be measurably and dramatically reduced in those facilities that are practicing this kind of stuff. And then we also see patient outcome satisfaction, workflow, user satisfaction, reimbursements, another thing. I don't know how many procedures it is now. Years ago, Medicare simply stopped paying hospitals for what they deemed preventable incidents. Urinary tract infections, sternal infections, certain falls. So it was, that patients experienced those. Medicare said, hey, they shouldn't have happened. We're not going to reimburse you for caring for those things. So there's a whole lot of benefits from doing these things. But these competing in complementary perspectives, again, this is a common goal. Everybody wants that. We can't argue with it. But there's some ethical reasons why we are concerned. There's regulatory concerns and issues from just an engineering scientific perspective. We have issues, and of course, our friendly legal community has a stake in all of this. And they can be complementary, or more often than not, they tend to be competing. Their primary goal legally is to protect their client. And I don't do this work anymore because, frankly, I just can't play in the sandbox. I don't know how many cases that I've worked on. One in particular, I had the attorney say, I don't care what the facts are. I said, the facts are anything I can convince a jury on the facts. I go, whoa. That's not how we work, in engineering and science. It just doesn't make sense. I had one guy challenge Newton's second law of motion with me in a fall case that I did during the deposition. She said, oh, Dr. Fennigkoh, is it your opinion that this F equals MA? And I almost started laughing at him. I said, I didn't invent this shit. It's a fact of the universal law. I didn't say that, obviously, but I'm just thinking, idiot. But so sometimes these can really get in the way of doing a thorough investigation, because some of the stuff, if it's not going to protect or help their client, they don't want to know about some of these things. So keep that in mind. But from an ethical perspective, engineering, we have codes of ethics, and a key element of that is that dedicated to protection of public health, safety, and welfare. It's regardless of whether you're an electrical, mechanical, civil engineer, software, we have that as an obligation, ethical mandate. That stuff was so burned into me when I graduated a long time ago. One of the first jobs I was at, when we were all paranoid over the electrical leakage and the safety stuff. I was just a little dumb monkey out of school. I was doing an electrical leakage safety test on a treadmill. The leakage current was on a few microamps over some 100 microamps. I took my dice, I cut the plug off. We're not using that. I was on this mission for God save the planet. And of course, I got my ass ripped out because they had all these stress test people lined up. And here I cut the plug off of the cord. I didn't understand what I was doing, of course, at the time. But I had this, you gotta protect people. You know, they had that whole thing in their heads of killing everybody. So, but that is a mandate. And that always gives us, in some respects, an obligation and responsibility to be mindful. Clinicians have the same thing. You know, first do no harm. Like Florence Nightingale, she'd probably be rolling over right now, but she even had some insight that the hospitals should do no harm. So she had some insight evidently that there is a possibility that we could hurt people. But they have, you know, equally ethics as well. Regulatory issues, we have requirements that we have to report these accidental injuries and deaths. Even if we don't even know for sure, you have to report that to the FDA if a device has been involved. And they've got forms to do that. Again, it's federal law to do that. And there's forms by which we have to do that. So it's pretty clear that there's regulatory requirements out there that need to be followed in the event of a suspected. You don't even have to have the facts yet. If you just suspect somebody was injured or killed, you have to report it. Okay? But the bottom line is, especially with some of these incident reports, you have to be really, really careful on how you fill those forms out. This is precisely why a risk management oversight on a committee like this we are the ones to fill that out.
So at our hospital, for some reason, they wanted to try something newfangled and not have a risk manager anymore. They felt as if patient safety was everyone's responsibility. It was hilarious. But we ended up in this fight here when it came down to completing the 3,500 one that is a FDA mandate. You must complete it at the hospital institute for anything that's happening. But they were trying to make it so that it was clinical engineering, biomed, HCM responsibility to complete that form. And I said, no, number one, we were not the person in the room. It should have been the person with the foremost knowledge. Have you heard who takes the reins under the risk management?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, that's the only one I've heard of the risk management people doing in nursing. There's nursing doing it. I never heard of the in-house HTM people would provide input. You know, especially after we would investigate, we get some equipment-related information, we share that. Yeah, that's a good question because you really got to be kind of careful because this is all discoverable stuff. If there is a lawsuit, and depending on how these things are worded, it's not that you want to lie, but you have to be kind of savvy on how you complete these things. So you just state the facts and kind of keep out any accusations or anything that can come back to kind of bite you. It's a tricky kind of semantics thing that goes into filling those up. That's a good point.
Maybe biomed's role should be to help determine whether it's reportable.
That's exactly, yeah.
Well, actually, I think that goes along with what's supposed to happen in any event at that time anyway, because in a normal environment, if a medical device certification is supposed to be sequestered and locked away until we come or a unbiased third party comes and evaluates the device and make it report. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. And oftentimes you don't even have a clue what happened within 10 days. So you had very little information you can often even put in those reports because we don't know yet.
I want to add something. What happens if it's a COVID patient? Or if you sequester it, what do you go to the clinic? Do you need to resupply the clinic first before we put it out? Or?
You have to put a mask on it first.
Right, that's definitely one of those things where you have to bring in infection prevention to assist with the sequester, and the unit will have to be wiped down before it comes out, or and then you can take a look at it after that. But I would definitely defer that if it's a COVID patient and something happens, the nurses in the room with that COVID patient can wipe it down. And then you can sequester it, but they are not allowed to remove anything off of it. They can't take off the IV pack if there's a infusion pump or a catheter unit. None of that can be removed. If it's an ESU, none of the forceps can be removed. Everything has to stay attached. It can be wiped down, just still attached.
If federal regulations says nothing can be transported, that may happen.
Yeah.
You can put red bag stuff, yeah, and there's even some potential issues of doing wiping some things down. There's a number of things that are going on there, sure.
In my career, I've been asked multiple times to fill out the form, direct clinical engineering. But it's always been collaboration with risk management and the other key players, infection prevention, the nursing staff who were involved. And usually it's after we've sat down at that roundtable committee and made up that determination of what's going on.
You can do it that way, that's a good way to do it, for sure. Yeah. One of the things that Inspector General report came out some years ago, looking at these reported incidents, was that about 86% of the events that are happening out there don't get reported. And as a result, that's like the tip of the iceberg thing here, is we don't learn. And they fundamentally concluded that there was misconceptions about what should be reported, fear of reprimand, fear of getting lawsuits. So things were happening out there, but again, a lot of it just simply isn't getting reported. And again, the real double tragedy is that we don't learn, we don't know. Well, from our engineering and scientific perspective, we've got again, a different perspective depending on our backgrounds, our skill set. We come at these things again also very differently. Henry Petrowski, I think he's still a civil engineering professor at Duke, I think. He's written a number of really, really good books on errors for prevention. And you got a lot of really good quotes. You don't want failures. We don't want to let a good crisis go to waste. Meaning that these failures, and often in engineering, the only time we really learn anything, is when the bridges fall down. Planes crash, shuttles blow up. You go, well, damn, how did that happen? Well, you got to go back, investigate, reconstruct, and analyze, and to find out that that bolt was defective, something was built wrong, and only then, through an analysis like that, can we learn. But if we don't investigate, it's gone. And again, especially in our business, it's a double insult, double tragedy that we don't learn from injured killed patients. To do these investigations, however, you got to almost have a different kind of a mindset, a different mental strategy approach. And this is where the whole concept of inductive, deductive reasoning comes in, and bringing those concepts to an incident. And the deductive process is kind of precisely what they do with the CSI stuff, the technists do. This is kind of how they generally have to think. And then you start out with some observation about something, an accident, a dead person or whatever, and then you formulate a hypothesis. You start to get some ideas on what you think may have happened based on what you see. You gather some facts, you make conclusions and identify a root cause. That's the general deductive approach, going from a broad down to a specific process. The key thing, however, at this early stage here, you have to be really, really careful about establishing your hypothesis. This kind of stuff I always kind of held closer to my vest early on, because initially, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but at many of our earlier meetings, we were always blaming the nurses. Yeah, they had dumb bastards, they didn't know anything. They were blaming everybody for the screw-ups. And we since learned that that's not all. These are a lot of very highly educated people that are making these mistakes. We got to be a little careful at that early stage. So we have a cautious, maybe preliminary idea, but just kind of hold it a little close at that stage. Gather the facts as much as you can through interviews, keeping the consumables, digging the wrappers out of the trash. There may be crucial lot number information, serial number information on wrappers, on the equipment, on the contaminated stuff. Keep that, red bag it if you need to. Just keep as much as you can, gather as much information as you can, photograph everything, even print off anything from the patient's electronic health record. There's oftentimes a critical date stamps on that information, and you want to gather all of that. And as you're able to, interview and talk to the staff that's involved. That can be a really, really tricky process to see. When you put all that together, analysis, you'll come up oftentimes with some ideas as to what may have happened. If you're really able to, which we often can't do, if you can replicate any of this stuff, that tends to be the proof. This is what you see the CSI do, is when they blood spatter analysis, they'll take a dummy, they smack it with a baseball bat, they look at patterns, and they can try to replicate the incident and confirm that indeed is what happened. And that's kind of the opposite way in which many of us were kind of classically trained, which is kind of the inductive approach. You do lab experiments, you look for relationships, you set up a hypothesis, you test it, and you see if it kind of behaves. And if you're really good, you get a Nobel Prize, you come up with a law. A law is that real stable relationship between two variables, not up for debate. And that's a different way of kind of thinking. So we got to kind of turn our mental pyramids upside down in a way to do these incidents. What makes them also more difficult is that our world are really, really complicated systems within systems. They're considered by human factors, ergonomics people, as high-tech, high-risk environments, obviously very complex. And this complexity has put what we call a tremendous cognitive burden on clinicians. You know, they're training, their goal is to take care of that baby, that patient, but they also have to be mindful of this stuff, which we love and we're comfortable with. But you start integrating all of this together, the complexities just start to multiply tremendously. And it creates a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong, obviously. The other thing we don't have, like aviation, is no standardization. Every ICU, every NICU is different. And where they put stuff is wherever they got some real estate, they're going to plop it down and stick it wherever they got it. So you got cables, cords, IV tubes, you got a kind of a rat's ass mess waiting for something to get screwed up. The other approach that is really crucial from this systems perspective I found over the years is to think of not just our box, our technology, the machine, but think of the big picture. Going into any incident investigation, I always try to back the bus up a little bit and get the big picture, thinking of, well, we got the machine connected to the patient. They're in an environment here that there could be tons of noise, as we all know, water fatigue issues, ICUs, noise, temperature, gases, lighting effects, even the facility design. You know, if your radiology department CT scanner is half a block away from your ED, and you're moving head trauma patients down elevators, threshold, down hallways, they're potentially inviting things to go wrong. But where it really gets complicated is at the interface, where the patient and the machine comes together. We've seen stuff like this all the time, but this is the only place, this is where we depart from aviation analogies. We're the only place, really, where we make deliberate electrical connections to patients, ECG, EEG, EMG electrodes, pneumatic connection with a ventilator, we have fluidic connections, art lines, pulse oxes, guys not going to the bathroom anytime soon, he's probably got a Foley catheter. You know, literally every orifice, we're going to stick something in there. We run out of holes and we'll cut down and we'll make another one, stick it in there. But these patients are, well, we do. But these patients are really compromised patients at this point. And this adds tremendously to the complexity. And in this case, it's literally the machines are one with the patient, not figuratively, literally one. Okay? And when you look at this now, what we've got here, we've got our machines talking to the staff. Icons, waveforms, labels, alarms, audio-visual alarms. The nurse has to communicate back with the machine, touch screens, knobology, they got to do things the right way. And the patient's in this big group as well. We got really, when it works, it's a kind of intimate dance going on. And it's complicated. And this is where often things will often break down at this fuzzy, amorphous thing we call the interface. How many times have you seen this? Not uncommon. You get surgeons, you see them get pissed off. Nurses, you saw the picture. You know, and I'm almost convinced why they get so mad is I think the machine, it's like the machine is mocking them when something doesn't work. You're a dummy, you don't know what you're doing. And that pisses people off. There was a guy in the Milwaukee area, I don't know, kind of like 15 years ago. His lawn boy would start. He went in the house, got his shotgun. He came back outside with a shotgun. He just blew the shit out of his lawnmower. Of course, he got fined, you know, you can't do that. But it's the same kind of thing. It just, and especially in healthcare, where people are really dependent on this technology to work, when it doesn't, it's really kind of understandable that they're going to go nuts on it. Another model, Lenfor, that I brought in, I found extremely useful. This is a model developed by a experimental psychologist from the UK, James Reason. He came up with this Swiss cheese model of accident causation, he called it, and I tweaked it around a little bit, but the concept is exactly the same. And he says, how people get hurt in high-tech, high-risky environments where you have all these intrinsic hazards and threats. How we prevent that from doing harm is we set up these barriers between the hazard, threats, and our human, our patient here. And these barriers could be administrative in terms of policies, educational requirements. You're not going to make people work 20 hours a day kind of thing. So you have administrative procedures, good facilities design, good equipment design, user training, but each of these barriers are not perfect, hence the holes in the cheese. And when these holes all line up at just the right unfortunate way, those intrinsic hazards now have a clear path to do harm. I also kind of think of those holes as like a lava lamp. They're not constant. They're always moving around. So a defect in one day might be over here different. So these things are very dynamic and moving around, always complex. So I used to go into all my kind of cases with that kind of looking at where are the potential weaknesses maybe in the barriers that people were using, trying to use. He called those holes either active failures, which is what we kind of typically think about. Oftentimes we think, well, this person didn't do the right thing, that's why something happened. And once we get to that point, often blaming, we stop. We just tend to stop. There's something, I don't know, innately that makes people feel good about blaming something. It makes us think we solved the problem and we don't have to do anything. But once we do that, we stop looking at all of the other things that might be at the cause. And those other causes are the latent conditions. And I love his term called resident pathogens. These are the things that are hanging out in the system, just waiting to show up and to do some harm. It could be equipment design, it could be some software issues that don't allow a person to back out of a mistake, or even know that they've made one. Real subtle things that often don't show up again until we have next. Legal perspective, again, another time, this is the classic scenario of what we have. Patients injured, they're the plaintiff. Oftentimes who gets sued is the manufacturer gets brought in, the physician in the hospital. And depending on the state you're in, this could vary. Some states have financial caps on how much damage they can get from a hospital, a physician. Often the manufacturers are the ones with the deepest pockets, so they get pulled in just because they have money. And so this is kind of the teeter-totter thing that we're often up against. And this is why what we learned also over the years is filling out these incident reports, 3,500 A's, is so really crucial to these kinds of cases, because depending on how they're filled out, can end up doing you a whole lot of harm. It's still amazing, all the cases I done are how ignorant the legal community is of our world. Of the CMMS data, all of that data is discoverable stuff. But very, very few attorneys that I've ever worked with even knew that that stuff was out there. I mean, they'd be drooling if they knew that we had years of documentation of what we did or didn't do. And very rarely will they come after you know that just because they open the door. But there's some crucial concepts in that regard. The process of discovery, it legally allows both sides access to the information that each side has. They're able to get that. They're also able to ask questions and submit those as interrogatories. After they start investigating a case, they can put together a whole list of questions that another expert might suggest that they inquire further. So there's a whole bunch of back and forth that goes on finding out information. In fact, one of the first, one of the first ones I did a case once, and I practice what we teach our students. Logbooks, you document everything. So I had my logbook, and I had all kinds of notes and stuff in there. I was testing a handpiece that uses radio frequency energy, like non-surgical facial technique kind of stuff. And all kinds of details in there, taking it all apart. And in one of the pages I had some uncertainty, so I just had a question mark on one of the pages. My notebook kind of informed me to come back and look at it again. During the deposition, I had to bring all of that stuff, the deposition. The other side of the attorney got a hold of the notebook, saw the question mark. What is this, Dr. Fennigkoh? You don't know what you're talking about here, do you? Question mark. What does that mean? You know, at the time, I didn't know. Well, you don't even know what you're talking about. So it's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It tries to tie up the knots and discredit everything you're doing. I hate to kind of admit it, but after that case, I had 2 notebooks. I started creating another notebook. I thought, the same thing happened in my report. I had about 20 references in there. Spent just months, looking up references, documenting my report, all my conclusions, and at the deposition, because he had the report in advance of the deposition. At the deposition, he went through my references. It took me months to found some contradictory material in one of the textbooks I had, tried to negate and diminish my other stuff. And that's son of a bitch. So after that, I just reference my reports in here. Go find it out yourself, But they come after you to mess with you. I did an insulin pump case, requested all of the information from the company. They sent me a CD. It had thousands of files. None of them labeled, they're just numbered. They said, okay, here's the information. You have fun trying to find it, going through every one of those files. It's just so they play games. Other key thing to be especially mindful of is spoilation of evidence, or damaging the evidence, destroying it. And sometimes you can do that accidentally and not even know it, and that can really, really mess you up. I did a taser case on a death some years ago, and the tasers, they obviously use battery-operated devices, and I had to get a special order from a judge in Wisconsin, even had it. I was testing it at our school, and I was getting close to the end. I got all my data done, but the battery ran out. And so I thought, well, I'll get another battery. Well, I had to go out of the state to get a battery. Third party. They plugged a new battery in. Little did I know, shut the taser down. There's firmware embedded in the battery that updated the firmware. And the taser said, I don't recognize this battery. I'm done. I thought, I destroyed all the evidence. Fortunately, that case didn't go anywhere, and I had all of the testing results done. But I could have got really trashed for having destroyed that evidence unknowingly, because the battery just didn't come from the company. So you got to be really mindful. We have an opportunity in our world to do that accidentally. And when in doubt, especially those devices that have error logs built in, like the ventilators, where we can download all of the events, time and date stamped events that are in the device. If we don't do that carefully, you run the risk of blowing all of that information out. You could have some serious issues going on. So when in doubt, always get an exemplar, an exact replica, but do all your testing on an exact replica or an exemplar device before you go to the actual device to download that information. You don't want to run the risk of losing that. So I just have a handful of.
We provided a owner sole AED to a medical facility where they had an incident. Take theirs and sequester it so it could download the information.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, but you want to make sure you do that. Oftentimes when you do that, you're going to have both sides, and both attorneys maybe are going to want to be there, and so you have to be careful to do it. We'll see how we got some examples of that too. So just a few case studies I have related to ventilators and defibrillators, so IV pumps, and a laparoscopic related injury. And this first one was a ventilator, suspicious ventilator death. Now we had this infant with many congenital birth defects at home on a ventilator. They just sent the patient home on a ventilator, and what the parents claimed that they recognized the machine wasn't making the noise that it normally does, and they went into checking on their baby. The baby was in respiratory arrest and died. So they were going to sue the manufacturer. They went to an attorney. Attorney got a hold of me and said, hey, can you check the ventilator out? Is there anything wrong with the machine before we proceed with this? So I had some initial hypotheses. I thought, well, maybe our alarm limits were too low because there's volume, intensities you can set. What was the ambient noise in the house? Where was the baby at compared to everything else? So I had some, suspicions at the time, but I was able to get an exact model of this particular ventilator and did all my testing on that first, and even trying to download the event log was really a problem. You remember our old Biomed Talk, I think it was? It was a website we used to have out there. Yeah, and really helpful. I just put an inquiry out there, and there was some dude out in our world. He sent me a procedure on how to do that wasn't even in the pulmonetics manual. It was a pulmonetics document, and he even sent me a cable. to do it. This was a real funky, it's not an RJ45 or an RJ6, it was a especially weird funky cable that terminated in the DB9 at RS-232, but it was a real cryptic, exotic process to suck that information out. And ultimately, I was able to figure that out and went through the whole manufacturer's procedures. They had to do all this testing in front of both sides. And I wanted to make sure I knew damn straight what I was doing. You don't want to go into these things looking like a jerk, you know. And so I followed the manufacturer, I redid the forms and everything just to make sure I pop through it. Went through the error log, which was also another problem. It was all text mushed together, had to parse it all out. And ultimately, what it revealed was that here at 1223, the plug was pulled. Machine lost power. And power lost. And of course, these machines have their own batteries, it kept running. So 1224, the power was turned off. Someone turned the vent off. The kicker was 911 wasn't called until a couple hours later. So it strongly implied, suggested that someone in the house shut the machine off for the kid. Attorney got that, dropped it, ran away, didn't touch the case. Oddly enough, like less than a year or so later, totally independent, totally different case, similar ventilator, which I now knew how to do much quicker, pulled the event log out, and what it showed, same kind of thing, machine was turned off at 1:13, turned back on at 5:08. I mentioned that over the phone to the attorney. This is a case, he said, don't write anything down, just call me up. Because anything I write down was discoverable, you don't want to know, and didn't want to have to deal with that. Call me up with what you found. I told him, well, it was turned off, turned on at 5:08. So, I said, so who's breathing for the kid for 4 hours? You're not going to bag a kid for 4 hours? And he got real quiet. Okay, thanks. And he knew he suspected at least something was funny. Same kind of other suspicious kind of thing. That error log, really crucial information. This is another case at the last hospital I was at. Large guy with cardiac surgery, with a cardiovascular ICU in the middle of the night with a cardiac arrest. Nurse went to defibrillate the patient. Ball of flame, not a spark, but a ball of flame engulfed his head, neck, chest. First, second degree burns over his head. You can see the intensity of the flame charring the stopcocks and the trig tube. You can see on the paddle, the charring of the paddle. And needless to say, shit hit the fan. You just don't blow up people in the ICU. And of course, they're on our case, and their instant conclusion, bad defibrillator. This never happened before, bad defibrillator. Clinical engineering, bad. You maintain it, you're bad. It was instant judgment that we screwed up. And I'm trying to back the bus up, get people to calm down, but I'm just covering my ass, you know, just get out of here. And it took me almost 2 months to try to put this back together because nobody's talking to me. They said, get out, we don't want to talk about it. So it was literally like having an upside down jigsaw puzzle. You're trying to figure these pieces, put these pieces together. We all the classic stuff, you sequester the machine, take it out of service, tested it inside out and backwards. Nothing wrong. Ultimately, what we were able to find out, little by little, put the pieces together. What we found out, this patient was a big dude, large build, narrow-chested guy. He went into cardiac arrest. Relatively small stature. Here, she lowered the bed, but not all the way, because they lowered the bed so you can facilitate chest compressions. She disconnected ventilator dependent patient. They disconnected the ET tube and stuck it, just laid it on the pillow next to his neck. And ultimately, she had insufficient paddle contact on the chest. We used a resuscitant Annie to kind of reconstruct this because the insurance carriers, the risk management people all over everybody, how did this happen? And this is what we were able to kind of reconstruct. High FiO2 settings on the ventilator. Incredibly important, have recorded that, pictures, 100% oxygen coming out of this ET tube. Flooded this patient's head and neck with 100% O2. Patient had a swan line in, they pulled by full gauze all over the neck, everything. The small statured nurse combined with the big patient, less than relatively high bed, she just simply wasn't able to make it happen. Open circuit voltage on these older defibs could easily be 7,000 volts or more. You get a spark. That's what we concluded. Another case here involved an IV pump. This was a young kid, I don't know, a couple of years old. He was in open heart surgery. sent up to the pediatric ICU. Had multiple IVs on them, and one of them was epinephrine that they discontinued after the kid stabilized, and they replaced the epibag for the packed red cells. And I don't know, less than a half an hour later, the nurse came back from the kid in cardiac arrest, and the epibag gone. Whole bag of half a little small bag IV with epinephrine free flowed into the patient. Didn't kill the patient from a brain injury. So somebody's going to have to take care of this baby now for life. And the hospital's claim in defense was that these pumps, they were always breaking a little door off, and that's what caused this to happen. And that was their argument and defense, that this machine was defective. We always had problems with these things. This is what happened. So I got retained by the manufacturer to go through the pump and to see what happened. They wanted to give me pumps. I said, no, I don't want to defend that you gave me a specially enhanced pump. I went on eBay. I got a couple of these things, tore them all apart inside out backwards, broke the door rollers off. And my question was, will this thing even work with a broken door roller? So they went through the whole thing. And, you really go through these things independently. You found, this is a really sophisticated little machine. Really a really sweet device in terms of the flow path that the fluids have to go through, the alarms and sensors. There are like maybe 30 different alarm conditions these pumps would go off into. I color it the cassette here with just the yellow fluid to kind of illustrate things. But the flow through the cassette is controlled with these little movable pins and solenoid valves that control the flow of the fluid. Did some tests on the cassettes. Also have a sweet little valve that allows for fast, flushing the line out. So it works like a regular needle valve. We can also just pull the valve out and cause the IV to free flow when you're setting it up and flushing the line. So characterizing that behavior was also something we wanted to find out. And it didn't take much. It's just like a tenth of an inch or so between fully open and fully closed. I don't know if this will work. If this is a little video I made of the valve, and you can see the cassette going in. Now the pump is open that valve up. So now the pump has control. When you pull the cassette out, the pump closes the valve. You guys see how that works? When we close the door, the pump takes over control. When you open the door, the pump pushes the valve closed. So the other thing I thought, well, how do we break? Can we even break the? How do we break the rollers on these doors? And so I thought, well, let's try it. And if you didn't have the cassette properly seated, and you tried to close the door, took like 30 pounds of force. So it's 30 pounds. That's a serious effort to shear off this plastic axle on this little door. The reasonable person isn't going to keep pushing against that kind of resistance. So with that, you could break the rollers off, but it took some real effort to do that. I did find out, however, purely by accident, that if I held in just the right place the door closed, I turned the pump on, the pump would go for about 10 seconds to a self-check, and the pump would run with a broken door roller, if and only if I kept it closed during that period of time. And further looking at it, revealed that not just keeping it closed, but I had to have somewhere around 3 to 7 pounds of force applied to make it run. If I had too little force, I was going to get a cassette alarm. Too much force, I was going to get another alarm. But there was a little small window in there that, if it was just right, you could make the pump run with a broken door. And then the thought was, well, how likely is it for that nurse in the OR to have done that? Nurse in the pediatric ICU to have done that. So, it would work. Ultimate conclusions, though, is that there was nothing wrong with the pump, and ultimately, the epi line wasn't clamped off. That's kind of like a nursing 101 thing. You clamp the lines off and you shut the IV off. And, the other thing is that there were multiple IVs on this kid, so it was really difficult to figure out. Well, I purposely didn't try to blame the nurse. Ultimately, that's what it came down to, as well as she knew it as well. This was like well over a year after the incident. She was deposed and just melted up, came apart. This was a crushingly devastating thing for her to have experience thinking that she almost killed this baby and messed it up for life. They had to leave. She had to leave after it happened. After the deposition, I got so mad at the angry at the attorneys because they just relived all of this tragedy. And in fact, there's a nurse in our program. She quit nursing because she got sucked into a case like this on a drug case that she was ultimately completely clear of. But it so trashed her confidence. She had no confidence in myself to work in a critical care unit. It just wrecked her. And there's a lot of fallout from that. This other case here involved a middle-aged guy waiting for a laparoscopic gallbladder, and ultimately died like about 7 days later. He found out that he had perforated his stomach during the procedure, and he had massive peritonitis and died. And I just had the same exact procedure done like a year ago, February. So I'm going into the OR, thinking, oh Jesus, here I go. I'm gonna get it. You know? And but it's a great procedure. We do obviously a ton of procedures this way, non-invasive, minimally invasive. And so the question was, how does this stuff happen? And ultimately, what we concluded was that these laparoscopes have a relatively high insulation failure rate. They're often sterilized with formaldehyde, kind of cold sterilizing, and over time that can break down that insulation on these endoscopes. And what had happened in this particular case, we got either capacitive or straight, we got coupling from the ESU to the stomach where they didn't intend it to. Of course, this is completely outside the surgeon's view. The surgeons, operating at the end of a long tube, they can only see what's kind of going on at that part just when. They can't see if they burn somebody at that point. What was really unfortunate, on the same cart, I don't know if any of you guys have this device by Incision. It's used for use with electrosurgical units. It's kind of analogous to a fault circuit interrupter. If there are straight RF pathways, it just shuts the ESU off. They had this machine on the very same cart with the ESU, but they didn't use it for some reason. Never did find that out. But if they had, that would have prevented that particular case from happening. And again, many of the CS staff, I don't know anybody that's doing this. There are instruments out there that allow you to test that insulation. You can't tell just visual gross inspection doesn't show up. You need to do some specific testing on those scopes to see how the insulation can. So I guess the whole bottom line with all of this stuff over the years is to treat every one of these events as a really precious learning opportunity. Again, ethically, morally, we're obligated to do that. We just have to. But again, it's just such a double insult to the patient, the families, to not have learned the tragedy. Try to identify those active failures and latent conditions, especially that have contributed to the event. So you can't just stop at that last event and think you solved it, and keep looking in further. And again, think of that big system, the system's perspective. Not just the machine, not just the patient, but the environment in which all of that stuff is being used. And don't just manage the last error, as tempting as it is. Because again, it feels good when we think we've figured out, especially who we can point a finger at, and everything you can do, try not to do that. That just shuts things down. And one of the reasons why we have such a high rate of non-compliance, non-reporting of the incidents, because they know, all the people know that we have done something appropriate. So frustrating. So again, the only mistake, I don't know. Okay, makes some sense, some of this stuff?